Hi, everyone. Welcome to Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford. He is the one and only Wes Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And Wes, it's Thursday night football this week. Packers and Eagles squaring off at Lambeau Field in a couple of days. So we need to take a look at this Philadelphia Eagles team. And the first thing that I see is a 1-2 record. But when you look at the games, this is a team that very easily could be 3-0, just like Green Bay.
Absolutely. In a very uneven statistical breakdown of them, if you really look at it. I alluded to this in some of the other content we've done. I mean, when you look at how they're defending the run, but they're giving up the yards against the pass. You know, Carson Wentz and the offense have been kind of beat up, but then he's leading these comebacks to make things interesting. Their run game hasn't been what they want it to be. They've been injured at receiver, but yet they still feel dangerous, right? Darren Sproles came back. There's just so many different little sectors of this offense and defense that make them really, truly dangerous. And the other thing, too, that always stands out to me about these Thursday games, this is about as random in terms of what you're going to get of any other time you're going to see on a schedule.
Yeah.
Game plans are important. Philosophies, momentum is important. But a lot of times, as Tramon Williams and some of these guys said in the locker room this week, it comes down to who's just the fresher team. That's the battle both of these teams are waging right now with the way they're approaching their practice schedule, both last week and into this week. And, you know, to some extent, there's some randomness to this, but the Packers are trying to dot their I's and cross their T's and hope that, you know, they can be the healthier, more productive team on Thursday night.
Yeah, well, the Eagles all season long through these first three games, they've had a hard time getting out of the gate, so to speak. You look at their score by quarters, they've been outscored 50-23 in the first half of games, but they've outscored their opponents 27-7 in the third quarter. So they've been a team that comes out of the locker room at halftime. I think they've been down in every game at halftime,
Correct.
if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
They've been down in every game, but they come out of the locker room at halftime and make their charge at you. And it was enough to beat Washington in week one with the big second-half comeback. They fell short against the Atlanta Falcons and the Detroit Lions, but had opportunities right in the final moments of both of those games with big pass plays from Carson Wentz and the ball slipping through the receiver's hands. And that's why I say this team is so close to being 3-0. And this is where I consider a team dangerous. And I know the Philadelphia Eagles are banged up on defense. They're dealing with a lot more injuries than even the Packers are.
Yeah.
But this is a team that a lot of people predicted would be right in the mix all season long in the NFC playoff picture. They do have a lot of talent on the roster, and they have players, obviously, who just a couple of years ago went through a Super Bowl run. When a team like that is 1-2 and looking to avoid being 1-3 at the quarter pole, which would be a tough spot to come back from, this is a team you got to watch out for.
No doubt about it. And it's funny, too, you're mentioning those games where they could have been 3-0. You could probably argue that the worst game they've had this year is the one that they won against Washington right out of the gates with how slow they started in the comeback they had to mount. I thought they played Atlanta really tough, especially given the circumstances with their personnel. Wentz had to go out. Josh McCown, who was retired like a month ago, well, he's in that quarterback.
And that was on the road in a primetime game.
Exactly.
As
We
well.
know what that's like in that stadium with how difficult it can be there. But Deshaun Jackson has been beat up. They lose Ronald Darby to the hamstring this past weekend. So, you know, Doug Peterson, we haven't had a chance to talk to him yet, but I'm really interested to hear his thoughts on exactly how they're approaching this week and just trying to get themselves as healthy as possible. Because the other thing that's very interesting about them defensively, as I mentioned, they're second in the league against the run.
Right.
But they've given up the fourth most amount of yardage, and, you know, they've been beat up in the secondary. So exactly how they're able to respond to those conditions, it's going to be really, I think that's going to be the biggest thing with who's going to end up prevailing in this contest. And for the Packers' perspective, it's going to be defending the run. They've given up some yards the last 2 weeks. To their credit, outside of the 75-yarder to Delvin Cook, they haven't given up a lot of game breakers, but guys have consistently moved the ball against them. Now you're going to see Miles Sanders. You're going to see Jordan Howard, who has a history against Green Bay.
Yeah.
And then you got the scat back there and Darren Sproles, who's been doing it for 12, 13 years now. So even though they are banged up, the point I'm trying to illustrate is Carson Wentz is enough of a magician, easy for me to say, magician, that they're still sometimes able to pull a rabbit out of their hat, and Doug Peterson's as creative as they come in terms of offensive play callers.
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago when Wentz really came into his own, I guess I would say, and unfortunately for him, he wasn't able to lead the Eagles on that playoff run, but
Right.
he was potentially headed to an MVP award that year. If he hadn't blown out his knee, he might have won the MVP. But the thing that's always struck me about him is he has the mobility to get away from the pass rush and make plays on the run, but when he is in the pocket, he's almost like a Ben Roethlisberger
Right.
in that he's tough to bring down. I mean, this is a quarterback, a young guy. Obviously, it helps to be in his early 20s like he is,
No doubt,
to be able to play like this. But this is just a tough customer at quarterback, and they are dealing with injuries at receiver. You mentioned Deshaun Jackson. Alshon Jeffrey's been out, so they've been relying on Nelson Aguilar and the tight end Zach Ertz. And Ertz is a guy I think who could be a tough matchup here. But Carson Wentz, I tell you, I've been impressed with him since he came into the league, and he's just a guy that strikes me. I don't care what defense he's going against, and the Packers are playing really good defense right now. But he's the kind of guy who's capable of a 350-yard, three-touchdown game anytime because he's just got that kind of talent.
Yeah, and I think that's really the truest sign of an elite quarterback in this league is if you can win when maybe your weapons aren't what they need to be. You think of 2015 with Aaron Rodgers and the run they got on, and you're playing a playoff game with James Jones, Jeff Janis, and Jared Abbrederis.
Right.
Not the top three that you were thinking you were going to have at the beginning of the 2015 season.
Yeah.
Wentz is in a pretty similar spot right now. You look at the injury report. They estimated that Alshon Jeffrey would be limited with the calf. Deshaun Jackson's still a DNP. Looks like he might be a couple weeks away. Zach Ertz is the guy. I mean, he hasn't been off to that fire, fast start that he was last year when he had over 1,000 yards or whatever the final stats were, but he's a guy that they're going to threaten the middle of the field with. Nelson Aguilar has been up and down throughout his career, these 4 seasons. We saw it in 2016. I think he was kind of in the doghouse a little bit going into that game in Philadelphia.
No
but
doubt.
he's reemerged. He was able to kind of bring his game back together and be the player they thought he could be when I believe he was a first-round pick for them a number of years ago. So from Wentz's perspective, you need to have guys you're throwing to. You need to be able to find playmakers on the field. But his ability to work off script and make things happen, it's one of the reasons why Philadelphia has been able to play these close games the last few weeks when maybe personnel-wise everything wasn't really working in their favor.
Yeah. And what jumps out to me on the defensive side of the ball for the Eagles when I think about that defense they had when Nick Foles took over at quarterback and they made the Super Bowl run. To see that this defense, if I was reading the stat sheet right, they only have 2 sacks. And I believe 3 takeaways.
Yes, 3. Yep,
three,
right.
3 takeaways
Good
through
call.
the first 3 games. That's almost stunning. Much like we were talking about the Vic Fangio defense last week with the Broncos, and that defense still doesn't have any sacks or takeaways because Packers did an outstanding job protecting Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers did an outstanding job protecting the football. But this is an Eagles defense. When you're talking about Fletcher Cox and some of these pass rushers, Brandon Graham, guys like that they have, boy, you would think they're ready to bust out in some way. 2 sacks and 3 takeaways in 3 weeks is not what they're expecting out of this unit.
Fletcher Cox, his quiet start is probably, I don't want to say the most concerning, but alarming for this defense. I mean, they need, at that position, it's going to happen that you're going to go through lulls, and you just can't expect, defensive tackles to just routinely put up a sack every game.
He's a big-time player, though.
But 3 tackles, no sacks here through the first 3 for them. They need more from that spot because if you really look at it, for kind of like the Packers were last year a little bit, that's where their pressure actually kind of starts, is inside, and then they work to their ends. But trying to get more pressure there is going to be a big thing. And as I said before, I mean, with the secondary, they only have 3 picks. They're sort of working through some new things. Andrew Sendejo now plays in that secondary. To get back to the defensive tackles, Tim Jernigan's been out with the foot. So, again, working through some stuff early on here. And then also trying to see, Brandon Graham now in this 10th season, where is he at this point of things? There's a lot of questions that they have to answer, but as you and I both know, the defensive coordinator there, Jim Schwartz, has been entrenched there for a number of years, incredibly creative with what he brings to the table.
A very aggressive play caller on defense, no question about it.
Yeah, so all those things kind of work in their favor, and they're always, there is randomness to these matchups. So this is a situation where if you don't really stay up on your keys, that's when Fletcher Cox starts to make that impact. So the Packers aren't taking these guys lightly, regardless of what the record says.
Yeah. I want to make one or refer to one element on special teams here, too, as well, because you made reference yesterday to the fact that the Packers really weren't able to show anything with the kickoff return game and the new guy, Tremon Smith, because of Brandon McManus's leg. But the Detroit Lions ran a kickoff back 100 yards for a touchdown against these guys. And this is what's always interesting to me, because when something like this happens, it's like, okay, how much is Sean Menninga, the Packers special teams coordinator, what's he looking at on the film and maybe what they can take advantage of? Or is it the fact that because they gave up a 100-yard kickoff return, they're going to get it shored up now?
Yeah.
Like whatever the weakness was, it essentially cost them a game, giving up a special teams touchdown when you end up losing by 3 points. And, so I don't know. I do know that if Tremon Smith gets an opportunity here, I think Menninga will probably let him take a shot. Not if he catches one, say 2 yards, 3 yards in the end zone. It's like, okay, let's see if these guys can cover or not.
And I think honestly, Mike, it usually goes one way or the other. It isn't just okay. You're just routine, you're average, you're on the line. If you give up a return like that, typically it ends up being okay. You really get everybody together and pull that unit and re-emphasize some things. Or it's sometimes a red herring for what is going to happen with it. I think back, honestly, to when the Packers gave up that kickoff return against Indianapolis a number of years ago.
Yeah, 2016.
I'm not trying to paint that as that was sort of the, in some extent it was sort of the beginning of the end for that unit that season. They just never were really able to be consistent enough. And then it kind of leaked over into a couple more seasons. So kickoff returns are so important right now in this version of the NFL, because you don't get as many attempts as you used to, as many bites at the apple.
Right. The opportunities are rare because of the touchbacks.
And it's on both sides, Mike. It's the kickoff returners making the most of those chances, and it's the coverage units when you don't have all of those reps, making sure that you stay in your lanes and you find ways to contain the returner when the ball does come out.
Yeah, interesting story there. It's like, and why I've always remembered this, I don't know, but back in the 90s, the Wisconsin Badgers had a kicker, John Hall, who just, for 4 years, he booted every single kickoff like into the stands. For 4 years, the Wisconsin Badgers kickoff return team almost never had to tackle or cover anybody. First game after John Hall had graduated and moved on to the NFL, opening kickoff of the season, and I believe it was Syracuse, runs it back for a touchdown against Wisconsin. I mean, that's an old story,
right?
But it's the example of when you're not getting the reps in game, sometimes you just never know what's going to happen. And kickoff returns, especially early in the season, are really sporadic, because when the weather is good, the ball is flying and there are a lot more touchbacks. And then you get later in the season and perhaps there will be more chances down the road.
And honestly, I'm really intrigued to watch Trey Smith's philosophy with what he likes to do, because he brought out 33 kickoffs last year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty big number for 2018 in the NFL.
Yeah, averaging 2 per game over, if you count that as 16
So what is he
games.
looking for? What is Sean Menninga comfortable with? Because even though we're 3 games into this yet, we've really yet to see anything from the returners. And I don't mean that in terms of like being disparaging to, the capabilities of them. We just haven't seen it yet. There haven't been many kickoff returns that have come out. There haven't been very many punt returns yet. All things that are going to be, maybe potentially on display at Lambeau Field on Thursday night.
Yeah. Well, I want to get back to a couple of things with regards to the Week 3 results in the NFL, because there is one development that can be very important to the NFC as a whole and to how things will potentially impact the Packers down the road. And what I'm talking about is the New Orleans Saints with Teddy Bridgewater as their backup quarterback, now their starter for the next 5 to 6 weeks, whatever it's going to be, going into CenturyLink Field and beating a 2-0 Seahawks team. This is potentially a really key development here in the NFC playoff picture, because if Teddy Bridgewater can do what the Saints are hoping and play like he did against Seattle on the road, this New Orleans Saints team could really be something when it gets Drew Brees back.
Well, and here's the thing that really stood out about that game is that Russell Wilson didn't make many mistakes. They did lose a fumble from Chris Carson, but he played pretty relatively flawless football to keep his team in that game and try to get a big victory at home. Teddy Bridgewater didn't blink.
Yeah.
He, as a backup quarterback, I don't care who you are. You could have been Aaron Rodgers in 2006, or you could be Teddy Bridgewater now. That is a difficult spot to be thrown into. You look at Mason Rudolph in his first start with Pittsburgh. Has a pick, they lose the football game. I mean, it just didn't go their way that day.
Mm-hmm.
Bridgewater did exactly what he needed to do to steer that offense because there are a lot of playmakers there. When you look at Alvin Kamara and certainly Michael Thomas, the multitude of weapons he has to work with are ample. So his ability to step back into that saddle, he's played a lot of football. He started a lot of games in this league already. But he's gone through a lot over the last 2.5 years.
And this is a guy, not to interrupt you, sorry, but this is a guy who would have a playoff victory or at least one playoff victory on his resume, if not for Blair Walsh, duck hooking the 27-yarder on the frozen University of Minnesota field there against, ironically, Seattle. But yeah, Bridgewater, before everything happened with his knee, this was a guy whose arrow was clearly pointing up in this league.
Yeah, and you got to remember, too, Mike, New Orleans has invested a lot into him over the last 2 years. They traded, I believe, a third-round pick to the Jets, who had signed him as an unrestricted free agent. You don't see that very often. He never played for the Jets in a regular season contest. He ends up coming over, and then they go and re-sign him again this offseason. I don't know how many millions have been invested into him at this point, but New Orleans sees a lot in him. Sean Payton sees a lot in him, and the Saints do have a question, whether it's tomorrow, next year, or in 4 years from now,
right,
where they're going to have to replace Drew Brees. What a great audition for him these next couple weeks with the weapons that they have. And New Orleans reminding everybody that, okay, even if Drew Brees isn't on the field, this is a different team right now. We're a contending team, and we feel confident in the backup quarterback that we have.
Yeah. Well, in looking at what happened on Monday Night Football in the nation's capital, the Chicago Bears went to Washington, jumped out to a 28-0 lead, and then held on from there. The bottom line, Wes, is the NFC North right now. You have the 3-0 Packers, the 2-0-1 Lions, and then the Vikings and the Bears are both 2-1 and tied for last place with 2-1 records. And those two teams are playing each other, I believe, this coming Sunday. So either the Vikings or the Bears will be 2-2 after this week. But the NFC North showing up strong here in the month of September.
I don't know how many times I've said it on Unscripted over the last 3.5 years. It's still, to me, the most criminally underrated division in football because I think so many people see the turnover at times the last 3 years with it in terms of who's been the front runner in it. Certainly you haven't had a team since 2010 win a championship out of it. But at the same time, I think people got to start paying attention to how many wild cards teams this division has produced over the last 5 or 6 years. And it's been every single one, every permutation that you have from this division in terms of the combinations that have went. I truly believe, and again, we're going to see how all this shuffles out. The NFC East looks like it could be a real contender. But I think there is a chance that this division produces 3 playoff teams. I really do think there is that possibility because when you start a season like this, Mike, and you take care of business in your interconference games, your AFC games, there's a certain amount you're going to have to lose within the division theoretically, but everybody's staying right on this, and they've all responded. Chicago got punched in the face right away off the bat. They were at home. We saw what that atmosphere was like. People are flying high.
Yeah.
They had to mount a rally after that. They have. Minnesota did what they had to do against a bad team to come back and win that football game. In Detroit, after what could have been just a total gut-wrenching tie where they lose that lead against Detroit or against Arizona, has responded. So in all those regards, I just think you're seeing what you need to see from these teams at this juncture of the season of maturity and ability to respond to some adversity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see how things are going to play out in this division as we go along. I'm already being asked in Insider Inbox with the Vikings and the Bears playing each other this week. Okay, as a Packers fan, like who do you root for? Like, who do you want to win? Who do you want to lose? I guess my take at this point, the way things look right now, only 3 weeks in, I have to believe the best scenario for the Packers is for the Vikings and the Bears to split their 2 games. So that's kind of the way I see it right now. So if that's the case, then you kind of just hope for the home team to win because the best odds for a split is for just the home teams to hold
Sure.
serve, and there isn't as big of a chance for a sweep in that series. But in another 5 or 6 weeks, we might be singing a different tune as far as how you want this to go.
I have a completely different theory. I think you need the Minnesota Vikings to lose as many games as possible. Doesn't
Really?
matter what happens with Chicago, because the Green Bay Packers have to go to US Bank Stadium in Week 16. If that is a playoff atmosphere, if that's something that where the division ramifications, playoff implications are all out there, it's going to be rocking. The Packers control their own destiny to some extent in that they welcome Chicago to Green Bay in Week 15. So from my perspective,
I hadn't thought about it from that perspective,
because I've seen these questions
with the remaining games the Packers have. You're right. The one is at home, the other is on the road against those two teams.
If I'm a Packers fan, if I'm following this thing, I want Minnesota to be completely demoralized. I don't want them having any hope going into December, because honestly, Mike, we know what it's like to play there when the games aren't with playoff implications.
Right, and the bottom line is the Packers are 0-3 in that building. And yes, that game is a long ways down the road. We're already talking about it too much, but we already get the sense that that's going to be a big game, and the Packers haven't won there.
The Packers won in Chicago. They won against Minnesota and Green Bay. They get a chance to get that other one back against Chicago at home. That Minnesota game, Mike, you know what that's always like there. So that's my perspective on things.
No, I think that's an interesting take. And certainly with the Packers playing on Thursday night and the Vikings and the Bears going head-to-head on Sunday, I think a lot of Packers fans are going to be watching that ball game.
Absolutely. That's the one to check out.
All right. Well, with that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. On Twitter, he's at Wes Hod. I'm at Mike Spofford at Packers for the team account. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.